Bear with me for 1 minute.
Who is not here yet? The mayor and Jen Rossi Thomas?
That's correct.
Mayor is here.
The mayor is here?
Yep.
Okay.
Welcome, Mr. Mayor. Can't see you, Mr. Mayor, but that may be by design. So we'll look forward to seeing you soon. So let's begin. Good evening and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Melrose School Committee. The date is April 28, 2020, and the time is approximately 7 p.m. For the record, let me state that this meeting is being recorded. First up on our agenda this evening is public comment. This is the portion of our meeting when members of the public are afforded the opportunity to address the committee on matters that are before the committee or otherwise within the jurisdiction of the committee. Members of the public are generally afforded 5 minutes each to address the committee. And I am trying to open up the attendee list to see if there are any members of the public who wish to be heard. As with our earlier public meeting or public hearing rather, there were no members of the public who wrote to us in advance to indicate that they wanted to address the committee. And Mr. Melrose has raised his hand. Thank you for that, Mr. Melrose. And I will unmute you, and you have your 5 minutes, Mr. Melrose. Welcome.
Thank you. Do you want to take a roll call to open public comment?
No, but thank you for raising that point. Unless there's an objection, and I don't see any, public comment is now open.
Okay, thank you. I have comments tonight on the Student Opportunity Act application. I'm a little disappointed in that it's not nearly as it's not trying to do to improve the Melrose schools what the Melrose schools need to do. You know, saying that our student subgroups that need focus support are the high need students. Whoever's typing, that's making a lot of noise on the audio. Anyway, you know, we know from another meeting that boys aren't achieving as well as girls are. That's a student subgroup that requires some focus support to do something for them. You know, I really think that somebody has to go back and look at this whole Student Opportunity Act application and even proofread it. You know, under the describe the rationale section, it says, in Melrose, our high need students continue to have variable success with closing the opportunities. I'm sure somebody needs to say something different than that, but that's what it says. I also want to say that, you know, as you all know, I try to engage in the public process around the governance of the schools. And there really wasn't a public process about this Student Opportunity Act application. You really didn't engage the public. You didn't, you know, you say that, oh, well, people could have come here at school committee meetings and said something, a public comment about it. That's not a focus thing about it. I'm on one of the site councils. It was never brought to the site council to talk about this and what needs to be done. Same thing with PTO. The whole point of this was to try to do something that hasn't been done before, because Melrose is going to get, you know, based on the Chapter 70 and the fact that we have for this year, or well, if the Student Opportunity Act funding comes through, we have a real windfall of money this year that could actually be done with something significant. And remember, with all the Title I money we get and all the under Chapter 70, the low income addition that we get on Chapter 70, which is where we're going to get the bulk of this extra money, low income is, if you will, a disability, but that disability doesn't just mean that it's kids that have behavioral problems and people who need special education. The low-income disability, we know from the valedictorians project from the Boston Globe last year, that the valedictorians of the Boston high schools didn't succeed post-secondary very well because they weren't giving appropriate supports in K-12 in Boston. Same thing happens in Melrose. You have people who are low income in Melrose who may not have a disability, may not be a behavior problem, but you're not developing them. Yet you take the money from the state every year for them without giving them the benefit of the money that they are bringing into you. That at some level is dishonest. The Student Opportunity Act application does not address that issue, and it's a significant issue. It would also be much better, instead of Melrose always going and trying to play whack-a-mole, hitting the latest thing that comes up in the city about, oh, this is a problem, let's go hit that, and then something else comes up, let's go hit that. We have the capacity even to use additional funds to create a better system that organically takes care of more of the kids. You know, again, in my view, we're going backwards we know that in 8th grade, we have a real problem with how kids achieve. We have a large range of the distribution of how kids achieve on the 8th grade MCAS. And that has come about from the K to 8 years of having completely heterogeneous classrooms and not addressing the needs of individual students. Expanding that to the 9th grade, which is the plan next year, in my view, is the exact opposite thing to do, that we ought to be able to frame a system where we can perform diagnostic assessments for kids, find out what they know, what they need to learn, prescribe a learning path for them where they are, and develop them. Doing a systemic structural improvement of the system will help the high need students and all the high need students, not just the disabled ones. It will help everybody. And the more, you know, I've asked for a lot of years to look at these issues and to try to figure out how can we do things differently. And no, just like the budget process, nobody ever wants to look at the budget process in a zero-based budget to figure out what's important. The same way, the educational benefit to children is never assessed about what can we do differently to do better for all the kids, including the kids that we all know need even more additional support. I can't say this enough that and I do want to actually be very blunt about the stakeholder engagement. There was an opportunity in the last several months since November to have real engagement on the Student Opportunity Act and to get the community to have discussions about what's important and what do we need to do. Not just come out with something where we fill in some boxes on a form and fill it in, vote on it and send it in and say, oh, we're hiring a few special ed teachers in a BCBA. So, you know, I know this needs to be done by May 15th. There's still time before May 15th. You can have another meeting before then. You know, why don't we take this back and actually do something real? Why don't you have an online meeting for people just to talk about and discuss the Student Opportunity Act? Actually engage the public in the process instead of pretending that the public was engaged, but, you know, putting it down on a piece of paper saying, oh, we checked off the boxes when you really didn't. And, you know, there's so much that's happened over the last number of years that the narrative sounds wonderful, but where the rubber meets the road, we're just spinning our wheels. And you know, I appreciate the new superintendent is listening tonight. I hope that she hears some of this message. I'd be glad to have a conversation with her about that. But we can do things differently. We don't have to keep in the same frame of the status quo that's happened here for way too many years, neglecting the high school, as I said in the public hearing before, that the high school should be the flagship of Melrose, and the budget process, the budget itself, the funding we give there, doesn't at all reflect that that's where we really have to give our kids a springboard to go off into the world, when we basically just kind of let them lapse in the high school. You know, to that end, I have to say, this isn't on your agenda tonight, but I don't at all agree with the way that the high school is doing the distance learning model. And I know that there's different guidance from the state about different things, but you know, to say that kids in the high school don't have to do any more work, you know, in certain subjects, they can just do nothing and just do their capstone paper in English in senior year. You know, there's an authentic way about addressing even the problems that we have today. And then there's kind of like simplistic knee-jerk reactions to it. And what the high school has done, you know, I don't have any personal experience below the high school at this point, but I don't think is legitimate. I think it's not authentic. I don't think it respects the children. It treats them all in kind of like, oh, we're just going to do something arbitrary and we don't really respect you. And you know, that comes through loud and clear in so many different ways, including talking about unleveling the high school next year in 9th grade. It just doesn't respect children. And if that's really what you want to do, is show your disrespect for children, keep doing these types of things. But
that's 7 minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Please, you can do better than this. All of you understand these issues and can understand that there is a different way. I hope that you will engage. I know the mayor doesn't ever want to hear more than 5 minutes of anything, and that's his prerogative. But the thing is that we can start to work on issues if you will.
For more, Mr. Melrose, and you're disrespectful to other members of the public.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rose. That's 10 minutes. If there are any other members of the public who wish to address the committee at this time, if they could raise their digital hands or otherwise indicate their interest in addressing the committee, that would be appreciated. And bear with me, folks, as I scan through that list of attendees. And seeing others who wish to address the committee, and without objection, the public comment period is thus closed. And moving on our agenda is are the announcements of the superintendent of schools. Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connell. Couple of things I want to address tonight. First of all, as you all know, to say this has been disruptive is an understatement. And many of our processes, which normally take place in the spring, are severely compromised and off schedule, not the least of being kindergarten placement. So we are working on kindergarten placement. I will be meeting with Ms. White Lambright, Ms. Rosso, and Brittany Ferguson tomorrow to discuss how far we are in making those decisions. Our goal is to have placements sent out to parents by the end of May. Obviously, the other piece of kindergarten placement is we cannot do student evaluations for our incoming K. The students that attend the ECC are all evaluated during the course of the year. It's the other half of our incoming student body that we usually set up appointments. And we will have to either do that when school begins in the fall, or if we get better situation where we can have gatherings, we would try to do it in August. The next thing I want to discuss is phase 3 just came out, as many of you know. I believe you received some of this from various other parties, including MASC. I think it's significant to note 2 things about it. First of all, the commissioner refers to it as strengthening our remote learning. There is no actual change in what we're doing. The practice that we have undertaken, not only here in Melrose, but across the state, is one that recognizes that you cannot replicate school at home. Parents are not teachers, even those of us who are trained teachers working at home. We have divided obligations, trying to teach our students and trying to teach our children. Parents may or may not have the understanding of current curricula. Some parents have language barriers, and many of our parents are still essential workers who have to leave their children at home with caregivers. So it is a trying situation, to say the least, for many of our parents. And while some of our parents are most fortunate and can give their children the needed guidance and attention for 3 hours of learning. Having said that, the Commissioner has asked us to focus on what they have declared power standards. We have undertaken an analysis of those power standards. The majority of them should have been taught prior to March 13th. And we are revisiting the ones that need to be strengthened and incorporating the ones that we have yet to get to. We should be finished with that analysis by next week. The other important thing to come out of the new guidance is the concern the Commissioner continues to have about equity and the variability of children's experiences during remote learning. And to that point, he continues to emphasize asynchronous teaching or instruction. There is no expectation anywhere that I know of, other than private schools, quite frankly, that is going to do 6 hours of virtual instruction in which you have a rotation of teachers and children sit for 6 hours engaged with a screen. To that end, our guidance is 3 hours a day, and that is teacher-driven and student-driven with an expectation that students engage in enrichment activities, including recreation and outside physical exercise. As the Commissioner has also pointed out, Massachusetts has been recognized for the program we've put forward with the guidelines we have put forward. We are considered second in the country on the strength of the remote learning and the expectations of the remote learning. The most important thing I have to say tonight is this. There is not an educator I know who does not accept that our kids will not complete this year totally covering the curriculum. If you had a third grader 4 years ago and you have a third grader now, there is no way your third grader you currently have will have the same extent and depth of education that your older child had. It is impossible to deliver. You have to understand the dynamic of a classroom where kids are engaged in a give and take. Teachers are responding on the spot to what they assess a child knows or does know or needs or can exceed on. That is not happening within parents' homes. We understand that. That is why the Commissioner and the Department of Ed has decided to focus on power standards, those standards that they believe are essential for children to advance to the next grade. Having said that, Dr. Kuchenberger and I, as well as the administrative team, have had a discussion that we realize coming back into the schools in the fall, our first job will be to assess the gaps in children's knowledge and to put into place remedial plans for reinstruction and addressing those gaps. This is the reality of the situation. And to sugarcoat it and say that remote learning can replace having a certified teacher in a robust school with multiple other adults engaged with your children can produce the same amount of learning is a delusion. And people should not believe that it can happen or it will happen. Our job is to give them the best we can under the circumstances. We will assess children in June so that we have data on where every child is. and that will help us with our planning in September. But this is an experience that nobody in the history of education has ever expected. Not even during world wars have we disrupted public education to the degree we have disrupted it with this pandemic. And the last thing I need to say is everybody needs to give themselves permission to step back. I know that my teachers, my parents, we all want what's best for our kids. None of us can control this at this time. All we can do really is keep our children as healthy and as active and as engaged as possible within whatever is working for your family. And that I ask you to be your primary focus.
Very good, Superintendent. Are there any comments or questions for the superintendent? Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you again, Superintendent. Much appreciated. Next up on our agenda is the consent agenda, which this evening consists of the following items: the school committee regular meeting minutes for April 7, 2020, and the following warrants: FY20 school S20036 in the amount of $454,499.56. FY20 March high school wire S20037, the amount of $14,930.31. FY20 March MVMMS wire S20038, the amount of $6,497.75. And lastly, FY20 March meals tax S20039, the amount of $44.34. Are there any items which any member of the committee wishes to remove from the consent agenda? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Made by Ms. Driscoll, seconded by Ms. DeSelm. Ms. Hogan, would you call the roll, please, for the motion to approve the consent agenda?
Ms. McAndrew,
Yes.
Ms. Razi Thomas, Ms. Razi Thomas,
She seems to have stepped away a moment.
Mr. Obremski,
Yes.
Ms. DeSelm,
Yes.
Ms. Driscoll,
Yes.
Mayor Broder,
Yes.
Mr. O'Connell.
Yes. And that motion passes with 6 in favor and 1 absence. Thank you, Ms. Hogan. And that brings us to the work of our subcommittees. First up this evening is Educational Programs and Personnel with Ms. DeSelm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First up on tonight's EP&P agenda is Professional Development Plan, FY21, and Summer Institute. For the public and as a reminder to the committee, there is an expectation that we will vote at the conclusion of this, and all votes will be done via roll call. Ms. Superintendent, would you be willing to lead us in the discussion on this, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Selm. So as you know, this is a typical spring activity. It's many months in planning. The Professional Development Committee, which is one of our distributive leaderships committees in the district, does a survey of staff to inquire what they feel that we should be focusing on, as well as aligning it with the strategy overview. We have a plan A and a plan B, virtual and in person. We do prefer in person, but we've already begun to implement some of the plan A. Some of the professional development that we were planning for this summer, we are offering this spring instead virtually, because we just don't know what to expect, and we thought they would be courses that would be helpful for people in preparing for next year. Is Dr. Adams on as a presenter?
She is.
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Adams is here, and welcome, Dr. Adams.
I'll defer to her.
I'd also defer to Jess Patty. Jess Patty is the social emotional learning specialist, and she is the co-chair of the Professional Development Committee. So I'm going to first just share a little bit about what was in the packet, and I'll ask Jess to share some of what we accomplished this year. And then very briefly, we'll share our plans for the coming year. So we provided a memo that sort of provides an outline. We also provided this year's school year professional development, some of what we have planned for this spring, as well as the summer professional development. So you look at a little view of the past from the beginning of this year, what's currently happening for the spring, and then what's coming in the summer. The professional development plan then also outlines our goals for the coming school year as well. Jess, are you on here?
I'm here. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Jess.
Okay, awesome. All right. So thank you all for having me. As Margaret mentioned, I'm the social and emotional learning specialist for K-5 in Melrose. So I just want to highlight a few things. I think I just want to encourage you, if you haven't necessarily looked at all of the things we've done a lot this year. And I'm only allotted like 2 minutes, so I'm just going to highlight some of the things that I feel like we're very proud of. Our personalized learning journey has been incredible this year in Melrose. You're all school committee members, so you know how important personalized learning is to us. We have had 2 teams present at the New Hampshire Design Conference. I attended and it was wonderful. We have also had a team present at MassQ and at the MASCD Leadership Conference. We have had the establishment of a personalized learning cohort led by our personalized learning specialist and our academic facilitator for secondary. In this cohort, there are 25 K-12 teachers, and these teachers have incredibly chosen to document their journey in personalized learning in Melrose, and they've committed to 2 years of this. So I just think that that's really admirable to note. They also even agreed to put themselves on stage when Maple decided to visit us in the spring, and it was really wonderful to watch that. They had a lot to be proud of. Our inclusive practice work also continued this year. We continued in year 4 of PBIS, the University of Connecticut cohort for the Lincoln School, and the Horace Mann School and middle school entered year 1 of the University of Connecticut's cohort. The Horace Mann and Lincoln School also met consistently with myself, the SEL coach, for just consistent work around checking in with PBIS implementation. And the other schools in the district, it was just a little more sporadic. We continued the Inclusive Practice Academy work with Hoover for the 2nd year, and Roosevelt entered its 1st year. For all of these training sessions, the coaching staff and administrators collaborated and shared training info with building staff following, so that the information didn't end at the training sessions. It continued and kind of was brought back to the schools. We also continued an immense amount of work with the Mass Partnership for Youth this year, and I think that that's just very important to highlight, especially with remote learning happening right now. There are no shortage of teachers in Melrose that are attending these webinars. I see Dr. Adams there all the time, as well as several other counselors and coaches. So we are all attending these webinars and have been throughout the year when they were in person. So additional staff has been added this year, myself being one of them. This is my 11th year in Melrose, but my first as the SEL specialist. Our personalized learning specialist was added. It's a half-time position. That's Melanie Acevedo. We added 2 additional digital literacy teachers, as well as 2 library media specialists this year at the elementary level. That team of digital literacy and library media teachers, they developed a K-5 digital literacy curriculum. And one of the bigger highlights from that outline and implementation were portfolios for grades K-5. And students are putting their portfolios on a Google site, and it's pretty incredible. If you haven't seen one yet, I hope you do soon. This digital literacy staff, I have to give them a huge shout out that during remote learning, they have just been incredible to teachers from K-12, even though they are K-5 staff. They have been a resource from pre-K to 12, as well as us as coaches. They are going well beyond what their contract kind of states right now. So I just feel like we have to give them that shout out. The secondary team, I know I kind of alluded to a couple secondary things, but just a few other highlights from secondary. They've done substantial work this year around the implementation of the new math, history, and social science curriculum. The 6 through 12 teachers have created a working group that has been established to review the curriculum, cultural responsiveness of materials. And that's something that I know Dr. Adams will talk about how that will continue. They have utilized a STEAM inclusion coach that has helped guide them on the next steps of unleveling of 9th grade. And a consultant was also brought in from Landmark to consult around a language-based learning program. So as I mentioned in the beginning, there's a lot that I'm not able to kind of directly mention right now. So I really encourage you to check it out and look. It's been a really great year in Melrose.
To highlight goals for the coming school year, we will continue the work around personalized learning, try to deepen and spread those practices and use the cohorts to help us do that. Obviously, the use of technology and supporting teachers in the use of technology and integrating technology has come up to the forefront with remote learning. So we're modeling those practices for teachers and building our own knowledge about how to provide professional development and leadership remotely. And so that's obviously a goal, and we predict it will continue to be a need. As Jess said, we are going to continue and deepen our SEL practices and build our PBIS structures in the coming year, increase inclusive practices, and use universal design for learning principles, pre-K through 12 as well. And those will be, you'll see those highlighted and outlined in our next steps. They are intertwined in what we've done this year, this spring, and in the summer. As well as continuing to deepen our work and provide a culturally responsive learning environment for all our students is embedded within our work. So at this time, Jess and I are happy to take any questions about what was provided.
Very well. Just for, I would prefer, if it's the will of the committee, to take one vote rather than two separate votes. So as that is the case, if we can limit questions and discussion to simply the FY20 PD plan, we will discuss the summer plan post questions and comments. So with that, are there any comments or
Yes, I have
questions?
Elizabeth, it's Jen. Rosie Thomas, I have a bunch of questions.
Please, you have the floor.
I apologize for all my technical issues that I'm having over here. Thank you, Dr. Adams and Miss Patty, for all the work that you're doing. It's really impressive. Just for to help the audience, if you could please, one of you, define what you mean by cultural responsiveness in terms of learning, and what you mean by inclusive practices.
Inclusive practices is a term that's used by the state to include practices that provide for the inclusion of all learners. Under that it's kind of like a big umbrella, falls social emotional learning, because that provides access to students who might be struggling with social emotional learning skills. It also includes universal design for learning, so that it provides, we provide and lower and provide more access to all students. And as well as we take into consideration the diversity of our student body when we're planning curriculum, instruction, the learning environment. So it's a term that's broadly used to include practices that allow for all of our students to have access, and all our families as well.
So, Mr. Sell, may I?
Please.
So, Ms. Razi Thomas, I think where you're trying to get is you're trying to make sure that the public understands that when we talk about inclusive practices, we're talking about race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, anything that could be viewed as setting up barriers or for marginalizing any of our kids. So when we use the term inclusive practices, we are truly using it as in its broadest sense. And everything that could be a barrier for a child, depending on what he or she or they may be experiencing in life, is what we want to try to remove. We also want to try to make sure that we are buying materials, we are accessing resources that are culturally responsive and recognize all our students. So this is an effort we've undertaken, and the deeper we get into it, the better we get at systemizing it. We've done it. We did an equity self-assessment this year with staff. We'll continue it next year. We've developed an instrument to use to as a checklist against anything we're buying. And it is embedded deeply into the strategy overview for this year and for going forward.
Thank you, Superintendent Taymor. I'm also curious, when you're talking about equity walks, what are you looking for when you're walking through buildings and seeing teachers teach? What does that mean?
So our plan was this spring to try to do some equity walks. Obviously, that didn't happen. So it's something we will pick up in the fall. So it's not something we've done in the past. We've done learning walkthroughs. So we haven't done an equity walk in the past where we were specifically looking for, do all students have access, regardless of race, et cetera. So that will be a new practice for us that we're adding. So we had identified a protocol that we wanted to use that really specifically helped us key in on those pieces. We also want to meet schools where they are and what are their particular goals, what do they see as their particular needs. So we may even narrow the equity walk to things that they really want to focus on. But so that we're going to pick up that work next fall, because it couldn't happen this spring.
Are there any specific areas of bias that you're targeting in terms of just like trying to build off of the good work that you've started?
So we know that our equity work needs to be continuous. You'll remember we did some training a couple years ago with the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, and some other folks. And we spent a full year, 2 years doing that deep work. We know it needs to be continuous. So you'll see in the summer professional development, we've had great success with some book studies where we ask people to really deeply think and then put into practice. So one of our book studies is going to focus on issues of equity. There's another book study that we hope to have grades 6 through 12 English teachers and possibly others look at equity and identity through the lens of children's literature. So we're really excited about that, about how do we look at the perspective of our youth and using children's literature to have teachers think about that piece. We've been doing a small group of us have been doing some work around deepening our knowledge about LGBTQ youth and families. And we hope to, in the beginning of next fall, to include something that really helps deepen our thinking and our practice around LGBTQ youth and families and creating an inclusive environment. So we've been deepening, a small group of us are thinking about that particular subset.
Couple more questions. Thank you very much. I'm wondering also about how your work over the last 4 to 5 years in competency-based education and then personalized learning unknowingly helped you to be more prepared for our remote learning emergency.
I think we had lots of teacher leaders. So there were certainly, we've talked about that kind of curve where we have early adopters who certainly were ready, had Google Classroom ready to go, had lots of technology knowledge up and ready to go. And many of those folks have been teacher leaders and supportive of their colleagues. As just Patty mentioned, our digital literacy team has been phenomenal. You may not know that they've been holding 2-hour help sessions every day. There's a group available in the morning and there's a group available in the afternoon. Every single day, there's a teacher help desk to help teachers sort of navigate any issues or concerns they're having. They're meeting with students and families to try to figure out anything that is coming up. So we have some great teachers who have emerged. And those that didn't have perhaps all the technology skills have really emerged as other leaders to help us really narrow down the curriculum and really think about what are the real prerequisite skills that we need students to be able to have for the coming school year. The positive is we are developing lots of technology skills that will support us in the coming years for what education might look like, as well as when we are back in the classroom.
And just one quick question about equity that isn't necessarily completely connected to this, but I just want to put it out there as all of this has unfolded, how have you addressed issues of equity around devices and technology and getting packets to kids and that, that piece that's so important in terms of.
Let me speak to that, Margaret. So in our first round of distribution, we gave out over 100, I can't remember the number, I want to say about 128, including to some adults, devices. We're doing another distribution probably on Monday. We had to push it out to Monday because of there's going to be bad weather. And in order to distribute the devices safely, the tech crew wants to do it outside, people staying in their cars, wearing masks, the whole 9 yards. And we expect to give out another 100 plus on Monday. I will tell you, the staff have gone above and beyond. We identify, not only do we make it public, every principal develops lists of families they have to reach out to personally. The drivers, our van drivers have been phenomenal. Families who have not been able to pick up, they've delivered to. They've delivered to the homeless shelters, kids we have in homeless shelters. We have some families who prefer packets and some families who the technology is overwhelming. Margaret and her assistant came into the building right after we closed and created 60 packets. When we ran out of those, Leah had them run off at Staples. The district obviously paid for it, and the drivers picked them up. Every person in this district, no matter where their job is, has gone above and beyond to make sure that we are reaching every child. Over the break, we identified students we were concerned about at the elementary level. And the SRO and Mr. Merrill went and knocked on doors to put eyes on kids. And we will do that again in a few weeks. Every member of this staff have been unbelievable in the amount of outreach they're doing. While I do get some complaints, the complaints usually are, I want more work for my kid. Why isn't the teacher online virtually teaching? We have also gotten wonderful, wonderful notes about the personal outreach teachers are doing individually, quietly, not talking about it, to kids that they feel need that remote hug. So I cannot say enough for our staff under these circumstances. And I'm sure the majority of staff across the state are behaving similarly, as I expect you are also, Ms. Rosie Thomas, with the kids you care so deeply about.
Well, thank you all for what you're doing and keep it up. It's a very strange time and it's getting, it's really nice to hear parents say, geez, I knew teachers should get paid better before this, but now I really know that. So thanks a lot for letting me have this time too.
Very well. Any other members wish to have comment or question? Seeing none, I would like to move on to the summer 2020 PD. Superintendent Taymor, did you want to introduce this or should I go directly to Dr. Adams?
You can, no, as I said earlier, we have a plan A and a plan B, depending on what the governor decides.
Sure.
So-
Dr. Adams, then you have the floor.
So you'll see in the professional development, there are activities after school gets out on beginning after the 19th. Many of those will say, oh, locations 8 to 3. We have 2 plans. One is if we are in the building, which we likely will not be. But our second plan is to go remote. We have some trainings planned for the next couple of weeks to help the presenters think about how to do remote professional development. Some of it, so the same kind of work we're doing with students where it's sort of a blended kind of situation where there may be some pre-work teachers do, some synchronous meetings where we're doing some collaboration and groups of teachers are working together, and then there's a post assignment. So we're moving forward with our plan to provide opportunities in June for teachers to be working together, to think deeper about some of our goals around personalized learning, social emotional learning, and our PBIS and universal design for learning. And we'll see in August, we'll continue to keep thinking a plan A and a plan B. If we're able to gather, we will. If not, we will gather via devices remotely. So we're excited. We have a lot to share. And we're excited to collaborate in that setting in June with our teachers.
Very well, thank you.
Glad to
go
take
ahead.
questions. Glad to take questions.
Excellent. I was just going to offer the floor to the committee. Should anyone wish to give comment or question? Seeing none. Ms. McAndrew, please.
Thank you. I just want to thank you, Dr. Adams and Ms. Patty, Superintendent Taymor, everyone involved in this plan for continuing this work so robustly this spring, summer, and of course throughout next year. I wanted to hear just a little bit more if we could, particularly related to the summer. And I recognize that we don't know if this will be in person or virtual, but how, if you are, and if so, how you are responding to the crisis itself and changing or thinking about changing some of your plans or offerings to educators, not just in areas that we've heard about, like technology, remote learning, how to make videos and, all that stuff that I know you're offering even now this spring, but also in areas directly related to the crisis and the response itself. So I'm thinking about things like community engagement, maintaining social connections if we're if we're in periods of long virtual environments, physical wellness and the connection between your mental health and your physical wellness, even good public health practices and that sort of training that might be necessary for teachers. I know there's a lot of moving parts, and I happen to know you're also thinking about all of that. So I guess I just wanted to give you an opportunity, Superintendent Taymor and Dr. Adams, to talk about how you're thinking of incorporating some of that into your professional development opportunities for teachers.
So I'll let Margaret speak to the details, but that is already taking place. We're a member of Middlesex Partners for Youth. If you know, the DA's office and now an independent nonprofit headed by Margie Daniels for a long, long time now. They have, since the beginning of the closure, put together probably one of the best sets of trainings we have ever seen, not only come out of them, but anywhere in the state. And it's all on those very topics, Ms. McAndrew. And so many of our staff are taking advantage of it. It's just very rewarding to see how our staff are just, all of them, many of them are signing up for these courses. I'll let Dr. Adams talk about some of the courses that Middlesex is offering. But this type of training is happening right now. Margaret?
So in response, this spring, Just Patty, who's on here as well, is doing a training around trauma and one around social emotional learning in UDL. We've been learning, as Jess said, we've been attending those Middlesex, Massachusetts Partnership for Youth training and learning as much and as quickly as possible ourselves about how we need to support teachers and students and families, and what are the systems and structures that will support families. Jess has been meeting with the elementary school counselors every week and talking about what does that look like, how do we need to support each other and support our students and families, and sharing information. We will be modeling for staff in our professional development that's remote, setting up a structure where we're modeling the kind of practices that we hope, especially if closures continue into the future, that we'd like to see in remote learning, about taking time to connect, how to structure and be really clear, how to provide choice and remove barriers, and how to use technology. We've been learning a lot, trying to learn a lot really quickly and trying to embed that into the work that we do. So it will be a theme embedded within how we structure our learning this summer and into the next school year. I think as we think about next school year and putting that into practice, we are going to have to do more around how to structure remote learning. Right now, we've focused really on embedding supports and really supporting teachers on the work that they're doing. Like I said, the digital literacy teachers have embedded tech support every day. You can find someone who can help you from 8 to 4 o'clock, and really supporting teachers in that way. So we're embedding it. We're learning a lot ourselves about what are the best practices and sharing that out as quickly as possible with teachers and our leaders as well.
So the other thing that the committee ought to know is we are probably in more meetings now than we are when we're in the buildings. I don't know how many hours we spend on virtual. Every principal is holding 1 or 2 faculty meetings a week to check in with people. There's grade level meetings in which people are connecting. The directors are connecting with their people. The administrative team is being very proactive to stay in touch with everybody, constantly check on everybody, see if they need anything. Again, we know that this is difficult for the adults as well as the kids, and that we have a long 8 weeks ahead of us. I think most of the communities, many of our PTOs, are trying to do things that are upbeat and keep people's spirits going. But again, I think we have to be realistic. The longer we do this, and as the weather gets better, the harder it is on people's spirits. I will also tell you again, and I know Julie is on, Dr. Krukenberger is on. She and I had a preliminary conversation that everybody coming back in August is basically somebody who has experienced trauma. Living through this, everybody has experienced trauma. And we know that that has to be a priority when we come back into the building in the fall. So this is very, very much on our minds.
A fun example, very fun example, Just Patty and Jill Tully initiated a community staff circle. We met we had our second meeting yesterday, and it was just meant to be fun. We didn't talk about school at all, but just a chance for staff to get together and we laughed a lot. And so we were trying to embed sort of that social emotional kind of connection with each other that we also want to model for staff to do with students. And it was super fun and the best way to end a very long day and start a new week. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking to do and try to continue.
Very good, thank you. Ms. McKendry, any further questions?
No, thank you so much.
Excellent. Any other members of the committee wish to weigh in? Mr. Mr.
That's fine.
Mayor, Mr. Mayor.
Just real quickly, a shout out to the Massachusetts Partnership for Youth. They have been so successful that they have actually expanded statewide with a little bit of earmarked money from the state in the last fiscal year, or this existing fiscal year. And I don't know when they will be able to come back to Memorial Hall, but some of their programming does take place at Memorial Hall. And it is, I've had the chance to visit and take a look and address the kids once or twice. And it's outstanding organization that has a real impact. And kudos to Melrose and to you folks for finding them and being involved with them, because I do think they do terrific work.
Very good, thank you. Any further comments from the committee? Let me then take the floor and briefly echo Ms. McAndrew's comments and thank the superintendent, Dr. Adams, Ms. Patty, Ms. Tully, and the entire team that has worked on both of these efforts. We are very and duly impressed with all the work that you have done and continue to do on behalf of all of our families during these trying times. With that, seeing no further comment on the floor, I would make a motion at this time, if it's the will of the committee, to vote on this matter.
So moved.
Second.
Motion to approve the professional development plan and summer PD made by Mr. O'Connell, seconded by Ms. Ressie Thomas. Ms. Hogan, would you call a roll call vote, please?
Ms. McAndrew,
Yes.
Ms. Razzie Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Obremski,
Yes.
Ms. DeSelm,
Yes.
Ms. Driscoll,
Yes.
Mayor Broder,
Yes.
Mr. O'Connell.
Yes.
Excellent, and the motion passes unanimously. Yes, nobody is absent. Correct. Just had to double check. It's hard to not see everybody in the horseshoe. Apologize. Next up on EP&P tonight is the Secondary School Code of Conduct. Again, there will be a vote required at the end of this. Ms. Superintendent, would you be willing to lead this discussion?
Yes, thank you. I told Dr. Bass they did not have to come. There are very, very minor changes. As you all know, we went through a mid-cycle review this year, and as a result of that mid-cycle review, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education had only one suggestion for our code of conduct. It's captured in the memo from Mr. Merrill to me. And that's about an expedited evaluation process for discipline. So that is the only change. The rest of the document is as you voted it last year.
Excellent, thank you. Are there any committee members who wish to comment or ask questions on this matter? Seeing none, please pass on our thanks and regards to Dr. Best and Mr. Merrill for their efforts here. And at this time, I would have a motion.
So moved.
Motion made. I'm going to give this to Ms. Driscoll for making the motion and seconding by Mr. O'Connell. At this time, Ms. Hogan, would you call a roll call?
Ms. McAndrew,
Yes.
Ms. Razzie Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Obremski,
Yes.
Ms. DeSelm,
Yes.
Yes.
Mayor Broder? Mayor Broder?
Yes.
And Mr. O'Connell?
Yes.
Excellent, and motion passes unanimously. This concludes our EPMP agenda for this evening. Thank you, and I will give the floor back to Chairman O'Connell.
Thank you, Mr. Sell. And Superintendent, is it fair to say that we can release Dr. Adams and Miss Patty from this?
Yes, we can.
Great, great. Thank you both very much. Much appreciated. And that brings us to Finance and Facilities with Ms. McAndrew.
Thank you, Chairman O'Connell. Good evening, everyone. We have 3 items on our agenda for Finance and Facilities tonight. The Student Opportunity Act application, which requires a vote, the class fund transfer for the class of 2019, and our continuation of our budget deliberations for fiscal 21. I think we'll start with the Student Opportunity Act application. I'll hand it over to Ms. Tamor. And just say before I do that this, I believe, is a required plan under the Student Opportunity Act that is predicated on our assuming that we will receive those funds. And with that, I will turn that over to Superintendent Tamor to introduce this topic.
Thank you, Ms. McAndrew. So I submit this to you, quite frankly, not knowing what will happen. While the funds were voted as a part of a new funding formula by the legislature, we just don't know. Every meeting I'm in, every meeting the mayor is in, we're told the same thing. So the commissioner has told communities to go ahead and submit, but there is no guarantee of the money. We got more money this year because we have partially because they reclassified the disadvantaged youth back to the free and reduced lunch count. And we have approximately 600 plus, I want to say around 620 plus students in free and reduced lunch. And that resulted in a windfall for us. Because you have 620 plus students in free and reduced lunch does not mean they are all declared Title I. We only have about 172 kids in Title I, so that everybody understands the difference in the categories and that the money in one does not predicate money in the other. Actually, as Dr. Adams would tell you if she was still on, our money in Title I has gone down every year for probably the last 5 years. The Student Opportunity Act is about subgroups. And as we know from the many months of discussion prior to the act being voted, we all fully understood that the majority of the money would go to those towns, which are in cities that are referred to as gateway cities, that have a high degree of poverty and a high degree of minorities. So the fact that Melrose got what they did came to us as a surprise. Our obligation here is to close the Opportunity Act for subgroups, not the average Melrose citizen. We can all carry on however we want about the injustice of that. It's neither here nor there. We have a legal obligation to address how we are going to close the opportunity for subgroups. Having said that, if you believe, like most educators do, that a rising tide lifts all boats, by helping our children who are struggling the most, we help all children. It enables us to raise the level of instruction in our classrooms. It allows us to have schools that are safe, supportive, and responsive. It allows every one of our children to feel that they are a valued member of our community and to contribute therefore. So when we went to write this, we did speak to PTOs. We spoke to the city council as a group. The principals spoke to their site councils, their PTOs, reported back to me. And everybody has a concern about social emotional learning and children that are having severe emotional challenges, and the impact of those children on the rest of our children and on our resources. Sometimes those children have disabilities, sometimes they don't. To me, it doesn't matter. We have to help them all. So we tried to design an SOA application that would give us the supports we need to help children and therefore help our buildings to become safe and supportive learning environments for all children. A key part of what we have discussed as a community for many years now is the importance of social emotional learning. The SOA, as it is written, includes 3 social workers. Every time I have brought this up, everybody I have spoken to has said, that's what we want to see. We want to see that emphasis on helping children's social, emotional, their skills, their sense of well-being. And this extends into the upper grades as well, because as we know, at the high school, we have a great deal of anxiety. Part of it is from life circumstances. Part of it comes with having high achieving children who have aspirations. So we went into this thinking about what do we need. The last thing that I need to remind you really, is it has been my practice since I've been here that while a class may have a special ed teacher, or I may have a class with a general ed teacher, we really are an inclusive district. My philosophy has always been, I don't wait for a kid to be labeled to get a kid's services. So I have kids in classrooms like my access programs. Some are general ed, some are sped. Makes no difference to us. Sometimes it's a sped teacher teaching, sometimes it's a general ed teacher teaching. We have tried to make sure all our sped teachers are dual certified so that they're content trained as well. This is the approach we've taken as a district so that we are always providing supports for all children. So Leah and I worked the numbers and we backed out the money we have to give to the charter school. We backed out the money that would have been the Chapter 70 money anyway, and we came up to 522, in that range. And this is what we put in front of you. I will correct my typo, but I have to be very honest and say we're submitting it, but I cannot promise we will see this money.
Thank you. And before we open up to the committee for questions, can you just clarify on that point? If I know that we don't know a lot about the state budget or anything at this point, and that the projections are grim, but what is it your expectation that if we submit the plan and do not receive funding in this fiscal year or next, that we would not be held to the requirements of the plan? Or you're submitting a plan that has a lot of positions.
Very simply, you know, if we don't have the money, we don't have the money. There's very little that the money, how do I say this? And probably the mayor can address this better. It's an unfunded mandate in that case. And you know, we have a ruling, I believe, from the state auditor that they cannot compel us for unfunded mandates.
Want me to jump in?
Sure.
It'll be a prelude to the even harder budget discussion we're going to have in a few minutes. Yes, it is an unfunded mandate. That becomes a little bit soft. The auditor is very good about pointing out when those things occur. They tend to focus more on low dollar unfunded mandates. Things like the recent example was the early voting, where the auditor ruled that was an unfunded mandate. It wasn't a huge expense. It was enough to care about, certainly. And that's why a lot of things that the legislature does are always always carry the caveat subject to appropriation. I do not recall, quite frankly, whether the Student Opportunity Act essentially is dual track, meaning it is contingent on the money or not. We all know, we've discussed at great length that the funding stream over time was anticipated to be funded not with any new identified source of revenue, meaning it would all come from anticipated growth in state revenues. That's not going to happen. So to I guess double down on the superintendent's point, there's two problems here. There is the this year problem, but there is also a big problem going forward with all of the out years of the legislation, because the revenue projections that they're based on do not exist anymore.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the committee with regard to the application itself? I don't see any hands. Ms. Rosie Thomas, I can't see you. Do you have any questions? Okay.
No, thank you though.
Sure. Seeing none, at this time, I would entertain a motion to approve the application, again, with the understanding that that this applies if we get the funding, made by Mr. Obremski.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Razzie Thomas, I think. Ms. Hogan, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. McAndrew,
Yes.
Ms. Razzie Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Obremski,
Yes.
Mr. Selm,
Yes.
Ms. Driscoll,
Yes.
Mayor Broder,
Yes.
and Mr. O'Connell.
Yes.
Thank you, and that motion carries unanimously. The next item on our agenda is a class fund transfer for the class of 2019. Ms. Sikora has a memo in the packet. Ms. Sikora, do you want to speak to this item, and we can take any questions if there are any?
Good evening. Yes, this is the class transfer from 2019. It's basically a stale account, and this is just going forward as usual business.
Very good. Are there any questions from the committee about the 2019 class transfer? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve? Made by Mr. Fiscal.
Second.
Seconded by, who was that? Sorry.
Mr. O'Connell.
Mr. O'Connell, thank you. Ms. Hogan, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. McAndrew,
Yes.
Ms. Razzie Thomas, Ms. Razzie Thomas,
Sorry, I was muted. Yes.
Mr. Obremski,
Yes.
Mr. Selm,
Yes.
Ms. Driscoll,
Yes.
Mayor Broder,
Yes.
Mr. O'Connell.
Yes.
And that carries unanimously as well. Thank you. Finally, this evening, we continue with our fiscal 21 budget deliberations. We held a public hearing on the fiscal 21 budget earlier this evening, and I would just point out to the community that in the school committee packet, there are 3 budget scenarios being presented this evening. We continue to operate, as we discussed last time, in an extremely uncertain time. State finances are very much unknown, but expected to be very negatively affected by the current crisis, on the order of $2 to $4 billion hit in revenue at the state level. And so that all that said, we are proceeding with considering 3 different scenarios, budget A, budget B, and budget C. All of the backup documentation is in the packet. And I would point members of the public as well to page 125 of the packet, which is a one-page overview of the 3 different scenarios that might be helpful. And with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Taymor to walk us through the 3 scenarios, if you might.
Thank you again, Ms. McMahon. Budget A is the original budget I presented in, I believe it was February, following my budget narrative. I had presented Budget A with great anticipation. After 8 years, I believe that thanks to the override, we were positioned to have a budget that was one we had always worked for and wanted for our children. It added 13 positions, most of which are captured in the SOA, as well as some additional positions to address our growth in population. After much discussion following the beginning of this crisis, we realized that the likelihood of funding a 5.6% increase over the previous year, this current year, not possible, never mind probable. So as an exercise, I had Ms. Secor develop Budget B. Budget B is our current budget plus contractual obligations for next year. That would be what is typically referred to as a level service budget. Even with the level service budget, as we've talked about in the previous years, a level service budget usually results in cuts in positions, cuts in funding to particular lines. And that would happen for us because we would still need to add at least 1 elementary teacher for the increase in population. So then we went to Budget C, and Budget C was this year's budget and positions that we really feel are critical to our ongoing growth next year. While it is not everything we want, we trimmed about, out of 13 positions, we put forward 5.6, including the elementary teacher that's embedded in the budget. We cut as many line items as we could. We've eliminated some positions, mainly, as I think somebody noted earlier, the building subs, some other positions. The high school is well underway in registration, and they feel that they can manage without the additional math teacher next year. So we're putting forth Budget C with a 2.3% increase over this current year. And again, I will allow the mayor to, or ask the mayor to speak to this. This 2.3% would include contributions from our offset, which I believe Ms. Secor included in the budget document. So that would even further reduce the city's obligation. What I would tell the committee is if we vote this and move it forward to city council, that we do not fill any of the positions, and I do not fill any vacancies that occur between now and the end of the year, except those that may be considered high need. And we wait until we see what comes down from the state. Everything we are hearing says we will not know until July, and even in regard to July, there's conversation about a 1/12 budget. So that is my recommendation to you. I have colleagues who are considering not renewing anybody who does not have professional teacher status. That is devastating to a district. It's devastating to the morale of a district. It's devastating to the young people who are often the low men on the totem pole. But beyond that, it's using a hammer when you don't have to. If we find ourselves in a position come the summer that you do have to do further reductions, and if those reductions have to include staff, we do have language in the contract, reduction in force language, which we can employ in conjunction with the union to make strategic decisions rather than a wide swath of non-renewal. So this is my recommendation to you at this time, and I will gladly take questions unless the Mr. Mayor wants to speak first to the overall budget health.
Ritter?
I'd be happy to, because and I've done this once before, and I think the numbers got a little bit grimmer since that point, and I've done my best to share with the committee information I get from the state and our legislative partners. And the word grim does keep coming up, not to bring it totally back to basics, but a few years ago, we were confronted with a school budget where the drag on the budget was our limited ability to take more in property tax. And so we addressed that with the override. And that is, property tax is a stable source of revenue. We know that. We know how much it's going to grow. Recognizing the limitations that some folks might have given the economy, it's still a very stable source of revenue compared to everything else. The problem now is every place else, right? So our state aid and our local receipts are variable and driven a lot by economic activity, economic health. So income tax, sales tax, capital gains tax. The state is projecting, depending on how you count the numbers, at least a $4 billion revenue drop by most estimates, possibly up to $6 billion, though it's not clear to me whether that represents a combination of both an obvious reduction in revenues coming in and increased pressure on mass health and other social safety net programs, but mass health in particular because it is an entitlement program for the most part. So that is the place we find ourselves. We know that the state is not going to be able to come through. I don't say that as really as a criticism. It's a fact of life. Just like us, they have to balance the budget every year. They can't deficit spend. They can't print money, which leaves us with probably the biggest X factor in certain respects, which is federal aid. So far, federal aid has gone towards, in the context of government supports, it has gone towards reimbursements for expenses directly related to the pandemic. So in other words, if you spend, I use Chelsea as an example, if you spend $500,000 to buy lodging space for your residents that might need it, there's the potential for reimbursement there. So far, there is nothing related to lost revenue, which is really the principal threat to our budget here in Melrose. That is the landscape. There has been some resistance, particularly in the U.S. Senate, to giving any money to direct aid to states or cities or towns. The Senate Majority Leader had initially recommended states and cities and towns file for bankruptcy rather than be supported in any way by the federal government. That narrative seems to be changing. That is to the good, but we truly don't know where we're going to land there, at least for the next few weeks and probably longer than that. So the city, from the city side, we are assuming a level funding of Chapter 70, which is obviously significant given the amount that we were anticipating getting as an increase, and a 12.5% decrease in unrestricted local aid, which is the smaller of the two big piles of local aid that we receive from the state. The reason for that is the Baker administration for the last 5 years has pegged unrestricted local aid to growth in state revenue. That's obviously going to significantly contract. That doesn't mean a one-to-one reduction, but I expect that we're going to see less. And we're going to have to wait and see on that. The prospect of 1/12 budgets makes that even shakier. I do think we're not going to know as of July 1st what we can expect, certainly annualized from the state. So we're playing in the dark a little bit right now, but that is that is the reality that's been dealt. We are in, relative to some other communities, we're in better shape. I'll use as an example the fact that the city did create that special education reserve fund. Very prudent thing to do. We plan to use that and to replenish it, so that there is a little bit of a cushion to make sure that we can address those unanticipatable special ed needs. But that is the lay of the land right now. Again, obviously subject to change. We are in constant contact with our state and federal partners just to get the best information we can, make the best decisions we can at any particular time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there questions on any of these three budget scenarios or the superintendent's recommendation around budget C at this time?
Ms. McAndrew, may I?
Yes.
So again, what I would say to the committee is, having done this together for a long time, you all know how difficult it is to cut. You know, one thought I have about budget C and knowing what we would have liked with budget A, if there were to be a better scenario this summer, or let's say in September, you could always add positions that you feel you would have liked to have had in budget C. That would be a lot easier than trying to cut if you adopted budget A. Does that make sense?
Yes. Maybe, so Superintendent, could you speak to any steps that you and Ms. Sikor may be considering taking during the rest of the current fiscal year that could help us at all in some of these line items? I'm thinking about supplies, materials, and equipment.
So
Moving into fiscal 21, budget C does include a pretty significant cut to those line items.
So again, we're hoping that once we get a handle on some of the costs that we have outstanding right now, we will have some funds left over. We froze the budget in January of this year. It just happens to be a practice that Melrose has. And given that there has been somewhat of a slowdown in expenditures during the closure, we're hoping by the end of May that we can assess if we can buy against next year. If we can, and we would probably purchase some of the resources for curriculum and for software license. There is some loosening up on the purchasing rules at the state level during this time. So we're hopeful that we can figure out some extra monies. We also know that under the new legislation about funding, that we should get back circuit breaker on 25% of our transportation costs for SPED. And that is supposedly still guaranteed. The latest word I got is circuit breaker is still guaranteed this year it's 75%. So we're hoping that when we know what those funds are, we can use those also to purchase against next year. We are going to go back into the building on May 6th under controlled circumstances, taking precautions. I have worked out these precautions with Ms. Procaris, the DPW director, because we have so much mail sitting in the office. We have to go through it. We have to look at our invoices. We have to look at anything else we may have. We have some work to do around grants. We've recently got some updates on submitting grants and may be able to extend some of those grants into next year. But we have to go into the office and figure all this out. So hopefully by the end of May, we'll have a better idea of some funds from this year that we can apply next year.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the committee?
Can I go again?
Yes, Mayor
Oh,
Bruder?
terrific. So on the subject generically of 9C cuts, or the possibility that we would have to cut that we would see impacts from state aid this fiscal year. The administration has consistently said that won't happen. I believe right now that the operational gap they're anticipating is somewhere between $500 and $750 million. Before March, revenues were actually ahead of benchmark, which is good but not great. It just means that the starting point's a little bit better. So I think we're okay there. I think folks need to understand that, as we are looking at an A, B, and C, everything that I've seen at the local and state level says that A is just not doable. It is. I mean, it was laid out under a completely different set of fiscal assumptions that were very reasonable at the time, were aggressive but doable. Right now, folks have to understand that B really is the best case scenario, that it is not a choice between A, B, and C. And if we do A, you can almost guarantee that we're going to be going back probably on more than one occasion and taking apart that budget if we vote it. And another thing I think we all have to keep in mind is kind of the long-term play here. There may be some impetus to say, let's turn over every rock, do everything we can to put as much as we can, even one-time money, into the school budget, but that will leave us with an inability to deal with the challenge that's going to be significant in fiscal 22. This is not something, this can't be viewed as kind of a bump in the road. This is something that, if past is prologue, particularly from the financial crisis of maybe 8 or 9 years ago, that this isn't kind of a hole to get over in one fiscal year. This is something that's going to take a lot of time and energy and creativity to build back to over a number of years.
Ms. McAndrew, can I ask the mayor to clarify, are you supporting B or C? C is the 2.3%.
Oh, my purpose was to take A off the table.
Okay.
Of course, leave it to the wisdom of the committee to decide. Right now, I think we can do. I want to make sure I get my letter straight. Let me pull it back up. Right now, I think we can do C. C is certainly what I would like to see, but no matter what scenario we pick, folks do need to understand that it is based on assumptions that are less secure than they have been historically. The game used to be, and I don't mean it disrespectfully, that, governor comes in with a number and that really sets a floor for local aid, both Chapter 70 and unrestricted. And then we hope and cajole the legislature a little bit to bump that up. But we're in a fairly discrete range. That range is gone. And I just can't, I think every time we talk about this, we have to make sure that folks understand that this is a totally different scenario. Now, I do think, and I appreciate the work on the school side and the city side to get us to that, to get us to budget C, because in the current context, folks need to understand it's a pretty remarkable, given the state of the economy, to be able to support really all our city services, but the schools in particular at the level we're talking.
Thank you. Other committee members, questions, comments?
This is Jen Rosie Thomas, and I would like to make a comment or two.
We would like to hear them. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say that it's completely understandable that we have to, well, we've already had the wind knocked out of our sail. So I think, of course, we have to adjust to the new reality. And so we won't be given the luxury of what we thought we were going to be given in terms of the original budget, which would have helped position the district in a better direction and get out of the long-term, holding on and doing more with less. And so we're very good at doing more more with less. But one area that I would advocate extremely strongly for funding is the program at the Lincoln School for special education students and for students who are struggling behaviorally. It's one of those things where it's ethically the right thing to do, and I'm sure everyone on the committee wants to do it. But it's also financially the best thing to do too, because if we can help those young people that are struggling so much there, and other students across the district who may go there to get better, then we save we save the family and that student a lot of headaches and psychological pain, but then we also save the district a lot of money if we can avoid outplacements. So that version C addresses a huge need that we've heard a lot about during public comment from lots of people over at the Lincoln School. And I think when we interviewed many excellent candidates to become our next superintendent, it was very clear that it's a problem across the state, that we are having some behavioral difficulties with students at young ages, and we need to help them when they need it most, when they're youngest, when it's easiest to help them. And the least expensive way is to keep them here and to build good programs around them. So I'm very strongly leaning towards budget C, the version C. And I am also, even though my wind has been knocked out of my sails, I still believe that Massachusetts has a robust economy, and we will come storming back more quickly than all the people that are saying it's going to take forever to redo this. I'm not mentioning you, Mayor Broder, but I just think, it's grim, but we're also very, very, very resilient and hardworking in the state and can turn things around quite quickly. That's my hope.
Thank you. And maybe just to clarify on that point, Superintendent Tamor, do you want to mention the positions that would be included in Budget C, special education teacher, para, BCBA, and social worker, et cetera?
And two, and they are, again, all positions that if we have to think of this in terms of triage, they would be the first priority for the very reasons that Ms. Rozzi Thomas talked about. And it's not just at the Lincoln. We have a growing ASD population. A BCBA is critical to those services. There is another psychologist or social worker in the position, some sort of mental health worker, so that we can provide more services at the Horace Mann and the Hoover as well. I'm scrolling. So if you have that in front of you, Jen, if you're in a better position than I am with your IQM, what am I leaving out? What?
Point 6 specialist, social worker, special ed teacher, para, BCBA at a 0.5, and related services at a 0.5.
Right. So again, the related services is, again, we have a need for speech pathology, OT, PT. Some of that has to do with social skills. Some of it has to do with sensory issues. The other reason for the specialist in that is, again, we have a contractual obligation. As we grow in size, we have to make sure that all of our children have art, music, wellness, digital literacy, library, media science. So we needed to add part of an FTE, so to make sure that we can be giving those specials to all our children at the elementary level. So that's an enrollment issue.
Thank you. Ms. Rozzi Thomas, other questions, comments?
Nope, but I'm eager to see C get passed someday.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee at this time? Seeing none, I would just note that at this time, we do anticipate continuing our discussions at our next meeting and a possible vote then on the budget, if that is the will of the committee at that time. And with that, we conclude F&F with my thanks to you all and pass it back to Chairman O'Connell.
Thank you, Ms. McAndrew. Next up, announcements of the chair. In terms of a BB update, my inclination at this point in terms of developing our upcoming agendas and as a practical matter is to move our decision-making around the potential reuse of the BB school to the back burner for the near term, and I emphasize for the near term. In addition to our being presently precluded from engaging in an actual public process in this regard with community forums, et cetera, as we originally planned, I'm also concerned that people simply don't have sufficient bandwidth at present to tackle this issue in the way it should be tackled, in the way we had planned to address it. Given the pandemic, the stay-at-home restrictions, remote learning, and the uncertainty and constant evolution of our budget process, as we were just discussing. With all that said, I will include an agenda item next week to afford members of the public as well as members of the school committee an additional opportunity to comment further in this regard. That said, at present, are there any comments or questions in this specific regard at this time? Seeing none, more to come on that. Thank you. And lastly, do we have any liaison reports? Seeing none from the crowd, I will say that I, along with several of you, participated in a tremendous program put on by our Special Education Parents Advisory Council last evening. It was very, very well attended. The slide deck prepared by the CPAC board and the participation by our Assistant Superintendent, Patty White-Lambright, were great. And I know those of you who attended know that. I can't say enough about the work that CPAC has been doing, not just collaborating with the administration, with the school committee, dealing with this shift to remote learning and the consequences of same for our special education families, but the work they're doing in engaging members of the public. And again, not just special education families, general public has been tremendous. I can't say enough about that. So anything else from the committee at this point? Seeing nothing further, is there a motion to adjourn? Made by Mr. O'Brien, seconded by Ms. DeSalm. Discussion, seeing none, all those in favor? And that motion to adjourn passes unanimously, and we are adjourned. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Very much.
Stay healthy.